that I had planned on having 2 programs on the 1812 back to back. That was never my intention. But last September, when Stuart Raker was here, of course he has worked with Miami Indians for many, many years. He's written books about them. And after the program, Tracy and I sat down and talked about how much everybody seemed to enjoy that program, and he volunteered to come back. Now, the first time we've ever had a speaker volunteer to come back, and since he lives in Maryland, that's a little bit of a trip. So we said, sure, no problem, you know. So then this year I was talking to Tracy about I wanted to have a program on the 1812 battle. And so I called Stuart and left a message. I didn't hear from him, and didn't hear from him. And I was still on the verge of calling again when it went over a message from him that he had been in Germany for a month. And I don't think he was last year, but the Germans have a big interest in the American Indians. And I just seen a history on the History Channel the other night, a program talking also about how many Germans came to the United States to go to see and visit with the Indians. And that was the first time out of time that Stuart saying that I knew that. But anyway, he said, well, guess what? I don't think I'll talk about the Miami Indians this time. And I said, oh, really? He said, no, I have a program on the 1812. I said, oh, okay. So consequently, you're going to learn a lot about the 1812. So I did want you to know that that wasn't deliberately planned. I tried to make a little bit of a variety for everybody. Our speaker today came to me because I asked a friend of mine that's really involved with the Grant County Historical Society and many things in Grant County. Asked her if she had if there was somebody that could give us some program. And she said, well, there was 3, and I said, when she came to the last one, I knew this had to be the one that I wanted because I knew the other 2. So anyway, she gave me the name of Stan Steiner, and I thought, of all the people that I had heard of connected with 1812, this was a gentleman I'd never heard of. So Stan and his wife have been involved with the Mississinewa Battlefield Society since the inception, which has been 25 years. Stan is a retired optometrist. He's also a member of the Grant County Historical Society, and his wife Jackie is sitting back there. And come October, they will have been married for 58 years. And about 6 months ago, he made a trip to Cincinnati and learned a lot about that apparently none of us knew about. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Stan Steiner.
Thank you, and you don't have to worry about me competing with Ray. I don't cover the whole board. What happened is I had to go to Cincinnati for some events and things, and I decided to take up a friend of mine who is the printer out at 1812, John Strauss. And he always said, come on down, I'll take you through the museum and everything. So I contacted him, and we went through his part of the museum, and he took us into the library. This is the train station in Cincinnati. It's got an IMAX, a library, a museum. It's a big event that's very popular. He took me into the library, and I told him what I was looking for. She brought out a big box of stuff, and everything was similar to what we already had. And she stood there and she thought for a moment, and she said, wait a minute, I've got something. She came back with a box of material, a gentleman, Henry Brown. Who's Henry Brown? Well, it turns out Henry Brown was the first merchant in Dayton, Ohio. He built the first brick house in Dayton, Ohio. And he supplied the Army in 1812 with many of the supplies they used. newspapers, I found things nobody has known about. And that's why we have new information about the expedition. For those of you that know about it, and those that don't, this is out at the memorial site Society has put up out there. And this is basically a quick resume of the battle. Lieutenant Colonel John B. Campbell was in charge of 600 troops, and everything they did, a very good synopsis. This, if you get down to Marion, the Society has put this statue along the riverbank right by one of the schools, Justice Middle School, Riverview Middle School, and it shows an Indian man, an Indian woman on the horse, and a soldier as they left after the battle was over. You will notice they were in deep snow. The battle was fought 17th of December. It was cold, probably in the 20s and 30s. There was almost knee-high snow. So it wasn't the best time to be out traipsing around. This is the printing on the statue. One of the things that General Harrison told Campbell was to take care and not harm women and children that were captured. To understand the battle, we have to do a little bit of the chronology of the whole situation. Actually, things started late April 1808. Prophetstown came into being. Tecumseh the prophet. They had been over in Ohio. They've been having problems with some of the tribes. The main part of their mission was to get the Indians to completely forego white man's ways, the Indian ways. In 1809, Harrison negotiates the Treaty of Fort Wayne. November 7th, we had the Battle of Tippecanoe. In Grand Council at Tecumseh, Mississinewa Village. Anybody know where that is? It's not where you think it is. Mississinewa Village is where the Wabash and the Mississinewa come together, up near Peru. And that was the village. All these tribes were invited, even if I did spell Delaware wrong. Okay, here's Jalapa. Here's where we do the reenactment. This is the river, which is now the reservoir. Up here is where the village was. And I also found out, doing some research up in Peru, across the river from Mississinewa, there was an Osage village. I didn't even know they were in Indiana. June 18th, war is declared. Little Turtle dies July 14th. Why is this important? Well, if you don't know anything about Little Turtle, he was the war chief of the Miamis around the Fort Wayne area. In the 1790s, there were two battles between the Miamis, the Shawnees, and several other tribes, and the U.S. Army. Both of these battles, the Indians whipped the U.S. Army, the worst defeats they ever had, especially at the hands of the Indians. And this was not 10,000 to 200 like it was with Custer. This was roughly 1,500 to 1,500, but the Indians still whipped them. Little Turtle was the war chief at the time. William Wells, his son-in-law, was a brave at the time. William Wells was an American boy who was captured and became an Indian. Later on, he came back and became a captain in the Army. The third time the troops went up to Fort Wayne. Wayne was in charge, and Little Turtle could see the way he was commanding the troops, training the troops, and he stepped down as war chief and said the Indians weren't going to do that. You all know the story of volunteers. Right after the war started, British captured Pacanne. This was one of those very peaceful captures. Troops woke up one morning and there on the hill above the fort were all the British and Indians. No choice, the fort was taken. August 15th, Fort Dearborn Massacre, William Wells was killed. Anybody know where Fort Dearborn's at?
Chicago.
Chicago, right? There was a troop there, and a general up at Detroit who capitulated to the British, sent orders to Dearborn, Fort Dearborn, they should leave, give everything to the and get out of there. And he sent Wells from Fort Wayne with some Miamis over to help him. When they got there, they had a little discussion. Don't be silly. He gave you a little discretion, stay here. And the commander said, no, my orders are to leave. But they decided two things they weren't going to turn over to the liquor and weapons. They took these items and dumped them down the well at the fort, which got me a little bit upset. These were the two items they really wanted. So when the troops and the families moved out from Dearborn, they got a couple miles south along the lakefront. Mainly the enemies came and did battle, massacred them, took a lot of them prisoner. They killed Wells, and to respect his bravery, they took out his heart and feet. That was, well, they showed respect to a good warrior. Same time, Hall surrendered Fort Detroit, and a lot of fighting Illinois, Indiana, Ohio, between the Americans and the Indians with British help. Indians refused Harrison's invitation to a peace council in Ohio. Ever heard Pigeon Roost? Southern Indiana. Shawnees came down and massacred about 25, 28 people. This was going on all through the Northwest Territories. The Indians felt they were very strong, very powerful, and they were winning. September, they attacked Fort Wayne and Fort Harrison, which was at Terre Haute, and the Americans raided and destroyed Indian villages north of the Wabash River. September, Harrison given command to the 2nd of the Northwest. All surrendered, and he didn't Commander Harrison. Indian agent advises Harrison to John Connor from Connor Prairie. Informed of Miami, sent messengers to the Delawares, inviting them to join the war against the Americans. For whatever reason they had, the Delawares never left the side of the Americans. They did not participate in the battles. They did not fight against the Americans. Harrison seeks approval to attack towns out of Mississippi. Besides the one at Mississinewa, all the way up towards Marion, there were Indian villages. Within 10 miles of Marion, there were 4 villages along the river. Secretary of War says, go ahead and do it. The Indians have to be dealt with. The one thing you have to bear in mind, it's never been written down, but it's accepted by a lot of people. One is in the President's mind, the Secretary of War, General Harrison, let's take the land away from the Indians. We want it for the Americans. There was a General Hopkins out of Vincennes. He went into Illinois, attacked the Indians who were attacking the supply lines, and he got whipped. If you haven't heard of it, there's a battle called Spur's Retreat, northwest of Coconut. What happened there was some of Hopkins' troops were chasing a bunch of Indians, but what they didn't know is the Indians led them into a trap. They got surrounded, and they had to fight their way out, and about 30 of them got killed. Second battle of Prophetstown, Hopkins went and destroyed it again, and we have Spur's retreat. Harrison orders Campbell to attack the Miami village of Mississippi. He has spared the chiefs, these friendly to the United States, and he's also advised to guarantee the women and children who are captured. Campbell was not the first choice. A general by the name of Duncan MacArthur. I think most people are familiar with General MacArthur. That's some of his relations. He was the first choice, but he had been captured and was on parole and couldn't accept it. Campbell started in Franklinton, Ohio. Columbus. Franklinton is a suburb of Columbus. From there, he moved his troops to Springfield. From Springfield, they went down to Xenia, over to Dayton. While they were in Dayton, they turned in all their weapons. Each man was issued a saber, a pistol, and a Jaeger rifle. If you want to see a Jaeger rifle, look at the 1812 exhibit. It's not a Jaeger rifle, but it's about the same size. It's like a blunderbuss exhibit. They were not blunderbusses, but they were very short rifles. The 600 mounted troops, guided again by William Connor, left Fort Greenville, Ohio, on an 80-mile march to the Indian towns. The troops, 600, you're a little fast now.
I'll get fired.
The troops, 600 of them, were mostly cavalry, but there was some infantry. But in Dayton, they were all mounted on horses. And I'll show you some of the information. One of the things I found out in Cincinnati, daily ration per person of a soldier in 1812. Think you could eat that much today?
What would it kill the ounces?
4 ounces. My question. But a gill is 4 ounces. Now, besides drinking 4 ounces of rum, I don't know what they did with 4 ounces of vinegar. The troops that left for Mississinewa took 10 days rations. And that's how they spelled beef. They took 12 of them at 500 pounds apiece, 6,000 pounds of bacon, 9,000 pounds of biscuit, 590 pounds of salt, which broke down to this per person per day. Other supplies that were purchased of the troops, infantry. So they had to buy saddles and animals for them. 62 saddles for less than $200. They had prices in that day. Unfortunately, on the paperwork, I couldn't make ugly items. Whatever the large was, 123 pounds, and it cost $24.60. Twine, webbing of some sort, something else, more webbing, bags. 600 men had 50 axes. By the time the Mississippi, there were 10 left. And this was an expedition. Every night they put up fortresses around where they slept. So they were cutting a lot of trees. The other thing is they moved through the countryside. They were in either 5 columns or 10 columns. Question? They were in either 5 columns or 10 columns, and there were 600 men. So this was not a small force. They covered 2 to 3 football fields as they moved through the countryside. And they still managed to surprise the Indians. They didn't know they were coming. Horseshoe nails, probably 24 pounds. 3,000 bushels of corn for 600 horses for 10 days. Bought 50 pack horses, bushels of salt, ropes, bags of rifle patches, 50 pair of spare horseshoes, and 2 reams of cartridge paper. Now, today a ream is 500 sheets. I presume it was the same back then. 600 men, besides the ammunition they were carrying, they had enough to make 1,000 more rounds for 600 men. It's not a lot in my book. Also, there is another site dedicated to the troops that came over to Mississinewa. It's on Indiana 1, just south of Indiana 28. There's 3 headstones there. At our memorial site, we have 12. 2 of these are duplicated. 1 is not. I haven't been able to track down why he is not. They have a nice description of everything up here, and this nice little site. They also have a story that somewhere around this site, as troops crossed the Mississinewa from the south side to the north side, one of them got trapped in a quagmire and disappeared. Was never seen again. Whether he sunk in quicksand and mud, or he took off and deserted, nobody knows. But he was never seen again. This is the information about the goings-on that's on the plaque there. Here's Fort Greenville. This is their route up to north of July. Here's where that site is where they crossed the river. There's a story here. Information. Bigger picture. Greenville, where it crossed. There's a creek here called Dinner Creek, because coming and going both ways, they stopped and had dinner there. Now this is supposedly 80 miles from Greenville to the towns. They did it in 3 days. First day, 20 miles. Second day, 20 miles. Third day and night, they did 40 miles. In knee-high snow and 30-degree or colder weather. Again, an old map. Mississinewa up to July. It's not known for certain, but going by the scouts of the time and everything, chances are they did fairly well follow the course of the river rather than going across country. One of the things I just recently found out, if you're familiar with the area, at Indiana 15 and Jalapa Road, North Marion, 500 North, there's a church, and to the southwest of there's a house and barn. There's a lot of trees back there. One of the things that everybody talked about, the stories, the diaries, troops involved, when they got to that point, they found a swamp, and it was frozen, and they had to go around the swamp. So it's pretty certain that the expedition somewhere between that junction and that house is where they crossed on their way up to the battlefield. Campbell's force surprises and attacks the first of 4 Indian towns near Jalapa. Not Mississinewa, but near Jalapa. Some of the chiefs they were supposed to protect, these were their towns. In attacking the first town, a little bit of information, the first soldier shot was shot by another soldier. Accidentally, on purpose, again, we don't know. But anybody who's been in the service knows it's not really unusual. This is an aerial view of the area. This is 600 North going in. This is where the reenactment takes place. This is where the battle took place. And our memorial site is right in here. So if you see the map out there, I also have a copy in the presentation. This is where they fought. The Indians came up this way, and some of them came up this way from the river. And here's where they were camped and fought. The Indian village could have been anywhere in through this area and down along the river going south.
Sorry, can you go back to that and show where the reenactment takes place now?
Right up, go back one,
How do I go back?
to the right, the other one.
That's what I.
No, never mind.
Okay. But if you follow the river up, these are some of the parking lots, and the
Okay.
battle reenactment takes place in this area.
Okay.
This is another view, and here's the memorial site. I took some pictures last fall to get an idea of what the Indians came through. Now, whether it was worse than this, more open than this, nobody knows. My guess is it was really worse than this. But they came across the river and into this type of area. The second day, just before dawn, after troops had attacked 4 villages, the Indians came back and attacked them. One of the things that happened is the American Army lost over 100 horses. They lost 12 men, died in battle and the way home, and they had 300 men that were discharged when they got back to Greenville because they had frostbite. Very bad frostbite. How did they get it? Well, given the temperature, a lot of them packed their moccasins, shoes, whatever they had on with straw, hay, grass, whatever they could to insulate. Then they would ride their horses. Now they get to a point they get off the horse and they'd start walking alongside the horse. After a while they'd get back on the horse. Their feet were all wet and sweaty and awfully cold. So that's how it came about. They started back to Greenville. Campbell sent a couple of troopers ahead so they'd have some food because they were very short of everything. Here's another picture. We have one in color out there. Here's the river. The road is along this line. Well, the memorial site is around here. This is where all the horseshoes were found. There was a couple of houses here that Campbell put the dead, both Indian and American, and then burned them so the Indians couldn't get at the bodies. The fighting was mostly along this area. This is about a 500-foot square. He gets back to Greenville, half his troops are discharged. This is the memorial site as it is today. There's the sign at the beginning. There's a monument to the Indians. There's one to the soldiers. And there's 12 gravestones back in here. If you are interested, the first Indians that attacked came up a little ravine there. And every December on the actual date of the battle, some of the society gets together and commemorates. This is the stone dedicated to the Indians. This is one dedicated to the soldiers. Just to give you an idea, this was American campaigns against the Miami Confederacy from 1783 to 1794. Here's Detroit, St. Joseph, Chicago, Leon, which is Vincennes, or pardon me, Lafayette. Here, Vincennes is down here. These are all battles. This is where St. Clair got whipped, where, well, my mind's moving. These are the two big battles that fought along here.
Hamilton lost there, didn't he? Didn't Hamilton lose? Or not?
Not Hamilton. Fort Washington is now Cincinnati. 1811 to 1813, again, American campaigns into Miami Lake. Fort Harrison, it descends, Pigeon Roost, Greenville Treaty Line, Messina, Prophetstown, Fort Wayne, Fort Meigs, Detroit, Fort Dearborn. They were not just one or two battles. It was a constant fight. And Mississinewa is, due to the publicity, where winners always get to publicize, considered the first victory in the War of 1812 for the Americans. That's it.
Delaware never fought against the U.S. government?
Basically, yes. Some of the Braves may have. But the Delawares basically were very peaceful to the Americans, which is why Harrison gave Campbell orders not to disturb them. And in their way to Mississippi, they went out of their way to stay away from what is now the Muncie area, where the Delawares live.
Kind of a warlike tribe towards other Indians?
Well, against other Indians, every tribe was warlike.
Okay.
Most of the time, Indians were not friendly to each other, like a bunch of countries in the world today. But sometimes, like when the Miamis, Delawares, and Shawnees came into this area, the tribes that were here granted them areas where they could set up villages because they had been pushed west by the Americans. And if somebody would like to see a story in the Battle of Mississinewa, I have a copy of a letter written by fifth generation Godfrey, whose relatives fought at Mississinewa. And the Indian version is a little bit different than the American. Any other questions?
I think it's interesting when people come out to the site for the event. I don't think they understand the magnitude when if you're in that area, what it would be like to see 600 men and horses approaching. I mean, just the width and, the length of them coming at you would be overwhelming. I mean, just to see that in today's life would be stunning. And that can be a little humbling, I think, when you're out there.
In today's thoughts, 600 men is not a large group of fighting men. In that day, Harrison's army was 5,000. So he sent 10% of his troops over to give you an idea. The American army was barely 25,000 men total. Canadians and the British weren't much more. The Indians were 5,000. So you putting it in the times, that was a large force.
Colonel Campbell was under orders to make sure that the chiefs were protected, but to kill their people.
Right. Well, to basically leave their villages alone if possible.
Only their whole village, okay.
Yeah, protect their villages, because they were friendly to the United States.
Okay, I guess, I don't know as much as I should, but you said there were 4 villages, one of those was Mississinewa?
No,
Okay, so,
Mississinewa is near Peru.
right, but there were 4 before
There
that,
were 4 Indian villages along that river.
and they attacked all 4?
They attacked all 4.
Okay. And then
They came back
the Indians
to
came
where
back
the
after.
first one was, spent the night, and the Indians got together and attacked them the following morning.
So he never achieved his goal?
He never actually got to Mississippi. He did achieve the goal to the fact that he destroyed the Indians' ability to attack the flank of Harrison's army as he went north up towards Detroit and into that area. But he did not hit the actual village.
And how many were in Harrison's army?
Harrison was about 5,000. One of the things, if we have a few moments, to give you a little bit more insight into the happenings. Colonel Campbell. Anybody here know anything about the Revolutionary War? The Battle of Kings Mountain. The commanding officer of U.S. troops at Kings Mountain was Campbell's uncle. One of the other high-ranking officers was his father. And in reading a diary from the troops that attacked there, one of the comments he made was they went, and if they couldn't carry it in their saddlebags, they couldn't take it. So how did Campbell get the idea to come over with the same thing? Family stories. So it's hard to imagine, but all these things go together to tell a story. It's not just Mississinewa and the battle. There's a whole lot more involved.
One thing from your list of things that they brought, when it said biscuit, would that have been like hardtack?
And I have papers that show that a person was paid, I forget how much money, it was maybe $30 to get the flour, make the hardtack, and deliver it to the army. What the prices were in those days, it's amazing.
Yeah. And how did those soldiers take it that they didn't get their run, I wonder?
They had no choice. If they couldn't carry it, they couldn't take it.
Question on the list, vinegar. I have read that it has been considered down through the ages medicinal.
It could be. There was. It just seems odd that 4 ounces of vinegar per man per day is quite a bit of vinegar.
Wasn't there with these ships when they used lemons and limes for scurvy? It might have.
Yes, sir.
When you said
Have you had a chance to converse with the Miamis and historical
No, because one of the officers of this is a member of the nation and has been on the board of the nation. And according to her, we're not interested in talking to anybody. The Miami Nation, I don't know if they're trying to blot it out, history, whatever it is, they're not interested in the history of that. Whether things have changed now, I don't know, because this was 20 years ago this was brought up. But we thought it would be nice to get them interested that they wanted no part.
I know that the Miamis actually fight against themselves as history and stories and
Well, if
ideas.
you would read the story by a relative of Godfrey, Their story is, American story is here.
Right.
History is written by how true this is, what actually happened, or is that just a story? I don't know. I don't know. Any other questions?
Is that Clarence Godfrey?
Yes. And this letter he wrote was done in 1927. So he was the 5th generation. Anything else? No? Thank you for the...
Stan, thank you. Stan was going to come in his uniform today, but decided not to since it's 140 out. Rating, so.
I just